On Thursday, Britain's Electoral Commission published information about who's been donating money to the political parties. The figures showed that the Conservatives received the most money, taking £8.3 million in the last quarter of last year, against £7.2 million for Labour. Joining me to discuss the donations to Britain's political parties is our political correspondent, Kieran Stacey, and our hedge fund correspondent, Miles Johnson. So, Kieran, what have we learnt from Thursday's figures?
The most interesting thing is just how much money's been donated. Both Labour and the Tories have done quite well. You said about 7 to 8 million for both parties.
That's right.
That's not only up on last year, we would expect that going into an election, but it's also up on the same period in the last Parliament. Right. And what that suggests to me is that this election is going to be so closely fought that all the big donors are piling in. They're all saying, right, we want our guys in, we're desperate for this. So they're giving much more than they gave even back in 2009, and that's good news for both parties, but of course it could all cancel each other out.
Now, of course, who are those big donors on the Labour side and on the Conservative side?
On the Labour side, it's really easy to say now. It didn't used to be, but now it's the big trade unions. What we've seen in the last quarter of 2014 is that the three biggest donations for any party during those 3 months were all trade unions to Labour. It was Unite, Unison and GMB, and Usdaw was quite high as well. Each of the main three gave over £1 million. Absolutely huge sums of money we're talking about here. What you've seen at the same time is private donations to Labour really falling away. And that, to a certain extent, is because Ed Miliband's pursued what has been perceived as an anti-business agenda, or at least an anti-business as usual agenda. So quite a few of the business people who might have backed, say, Tony Blair are not backing Labour anymore. On the Tory side, we've seen the predominance of city firms in particular, hedge funds to a certain extent, but really we're talking about hedge funds, private equity firms, small private banks, all of these people, and I think it's no coincidence that these are the people who might be hit, for example, if Labour gets in and imposes a bank bonus tax.
Miles, could I bring you in here on this? Who are some of these city figures that are backing the Conservatives?
Well, it's interesting, as Kieran said, you have actually quite a broad mix of people from the city. Whilst I think the Labour Party has sort of characterised many of the donors of the Conservative Party as hedge funds, actually what we've seen in these most recent figures is that there's not that many hedge funds in there. They're actually people from other walks of life. You know, you have people as diverse as sort of mining magnates to, you know, venture capitalists and, you know, other forms of sort of like entrepreneurs. So it's a sort of interesting development in the sense that this hedge fund element of the political donations to the Conservative Party has become so politicised in recent weeks. You know, we had the thing with Lord Fink, you know, we had Ed Miliband calling out, you know, dodgy donors and the like in Parliament, and this caused a sort of, you know, a controversy and, you know, a sort of disagreement between the Conservatives and the Labour Party on that matter. So I think it's sort of possible that maybe some of you know, the regular donors who did come from the world of hedge funds might sort of have been told maybe don't give so much money going up into the election.
Or maybe they haven't been told that. They've simply decided on their own backs, you know what, I don't want to be called up in Prime Minister's question time anymore.
That's right, because they stayed away from the fundraising ball, didn't they? The black and white ball last week, we didn't see a lot of big hedge fund names there.
Well, I think it's as Kieran says, I mean, there's probably two elements to this, because a lot of these guys are very discreet people. They don't court a big public profile, and I think probably it's a thing of nightmares for them to be called out in Prime Minister's question time. So going to the black and white ball, you know, where you have lots of journalists waiting outside, photographers, you know, waiting to sort of pat people, I think that's probably the last thing they want. And for the Conservatives, I don't think they really want to have that sort of association coming up into the election.
I mean, all this controversy about donations and donors has led to some calls for changes in the system, hasn't it? So, Kieran, what can you tell us about the prospects for a change in the system of funding Britain's political parties?
Very low. We've had, I think now, 4 or 5 years of pretty steady cross-party talks about how to reform the system. And it's clear what both parties want. They want some kind of cap on how much can be given in any one kind of donation. Particularly Labour wants that, and the Tories want some kind of reform to union funding of the Labour Party. The problem is they both make the conditions on the other so onerous that it's almost impossible for the other side to agree, and so we continue in this arms race. It's interesting whether we'll ever get to the stage where both parties look at it and think things are so bad now that we really have to do something. One option, of course, would be public funding, would be taxpayer funding of political parties.
Is that going to happen?
No, I don't think so, not anytime soon. There was a really interesting poll out over the weekend that showed that okay, voters don't particularly like the current party funding model, but when put to the two alternatives, do you prefer what happens now with big city types and big unions funding the political parties, or would you rather pay for it yourself? They pick the former. They'd rather have the status quo.
So it sounds like the controversy over donors and donations is going to be with us for many years to come. Kieran, Miles, thank you very much for joining. And you can follow all of the FT's election coverage on ft.com on our special general election page.